for tonight, I was looking for some, I got the idea, well, maybe bees would be a great topic. And I thought, well, who am I going to call? So call Lori Smith in Markdale at Gray Ag Services. She knows everything, but Emily answered the phone there. Lori was off. I've known Lori for a long time. She won the Tommy Cooper Award a few years ago, so she's really outstanding. But Emily at Gray Ag Services recommended Janine McGowan as someone that could really talk to us about bees and their diversity. Janine has roots in the Meaford area and has studied at Guelph, University of Guelph, and where she was very, very active in their programs there and with the apiculture programs. And also has done some work at the ROM with their programs with citizen science and meeting people and promoting pollinators and that sort of thing. So as well as her own activities here in Grey County as a beekeeper, and also teaching programs on beekeeping, I think at Georgian College and that sort of thing. So it's a real pleasure to have somebody local come to talk to us about bees. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to apologize in advance for probably moving around on the stage and away from the microphone too much. I'm afraid I take after my bees in that way, and I can't stand still. I just wanted to say, first and foremost, that the book that you guys put out on goldenrods, asters, and fleabanes is absolutely just my love, especially seeing how a lot of pollinators actually visit all these flowers. And it just expanded my world even much more about those kinds of flowers. The calico aster is out right now, and I believe it's probably one of the prettiest I've seen. I actually also like to image their pollen grains under a microscope, and I kind of just keep cataloging all these pollen grains because, like you guys, I'm a nature enthusiast and also just a busybody. And then, of course, I actually just wanted to see, just inquiring minds want to know if there's actually any fellow beekeepers here in the house tonight. Okay. One? Is there another? Two? Three? Okay. And you're all just sitting in a cluster. That's perfect. Yes, of course. Okay, alrighty. I'd like to hear more about that. I'm trying to be mindful of the time. Unfortunately, I can go on until Kingdom Come, so I'm just going to try to keep my eye on the time here. There will be certain slides that may or may not be overly verbose, like just too much text. I'm going to abbreviate some of that, but don't worry, I'm not missing any important stuff. But let's get started. My brief bio, actually, I went off to school. I was one of the lucky groups of kids, basically, who actually had the pleasure of staying behind for grade 13. I was a year older, a year more mature, presumably. Yeah, I was in my second year of studying biology at the University of Guelph. And I really started thinking I was going to get into groundwater and hydrogeology, thinking I was going to help keep the water clean and help people actually have access to clean water. Unfortunately, the further I kind of dug into things, I kind of realized that a lot of it would probably be kowtowing to a lot of mining corporations, maybe, just maybe, saying yes to things that I didn't necessarily want to say yes to. And so I kind of quickly abandoned that, even though I found hydrogeology really, really fascinating. So I was kind of blindly just pawing around in the dark looking for something. But because I am who I am, I took a multitude of different courses. And I actually just stumbled upon introductory apiculture. And to be honest, the course was great, but it's when we actually went on a field trip to the University of Guelph's Honeybee Research Center that it was like lightning down my spine. I was like, this is what I need to do. I felt so lucky to actually have found the thing, but of course because I actually went looking for something, but it was just, I was off like a rocket. I could not stop myself, and I just kind of went from there, basically. So I worked and studied at the Bee Lab, is what I'm going to call it, for about 6 years. And then I was actually offered to stay to do a master's project because, again, I was that bee nerd who just couldn't get enough. And so I stayed and did a master's project. Unfortunately, I was crammed in the lab, but thankfully, I guess I have to thank my professor for that because I am now more of a well-rounded scientist. And I actually did my master's project on the cryopreservation of this one gut parasite that honeybees get. It's called Nosema cerana. It causes dysentery in honeybees. And I actually figured out how to basically cryopreserve them in so much that researchers could actually just keep vials in their laboratories instead of actually having to keep live infected hosts, which were honeybees. So that research actually is kind of a little feather in my cap. It's being used in Sweden and all sorts of places. And there's many a lab nerd out there that get to use my protocols now. So then I've actually been, I guess, working surrounding the field of apiculture, research, therapy, education, commercial beekeeping for about 18 years now. Beekeeping is hard and it's honest work. There's no love lost sometimes between really angry bees. This is me about 3 months in working at the Honeybee Research Center, where a bee stung me in my upper gums. And that explains this really swollen, really poor Botox job that looks like I got. I couldn't eat or drink for a couple days and I just messed all over the place. But then, yeah, I got kind of my tolerance to the venom built up, and I was again just off to the races. I would lie in bed just scratching my hands. I'd have to wear mittens to bed. But once my immunity got built up, I didn't feel so crazy after all. One really cool thing about apiculture, though, so apiculture is the kind of study of bees, or honeybees in particular. It's just all the multiple facets of beekeeping. So it's like an introduction, and you can actually expand out into so many different subjects. So beekeeping itself is actually animal husbandry. It involves a lot of agriculture. It involves food security through pollination and egg, and then, of course, a whole bunch of ecology as well. For the record, you can name a place on a body, and I've been stung there. I would say the belly button was probably the weirdest. I would not recommend. So just continuing in, honeybees are actually really great teachers. They're a eusocial insect, and they actually really do know kind of the value of community and working together and understanding the division of labor and. Of course, they're also great ambassadors. So when I get the chance to talk about honeybees, I actually also use that as a platform to then start discussing the importance of native pollinators. I call myself an admiring servant when I go to the bee yard, and they tend to appreciate that. As you can tell, I really do love everything bee, including bee overalls. And then, of course, yeah, I really do try to push habitat conservation in so much that hopefully maybe we can start moving past these sterile monoculture lawns. I am up on a little soapbox here, so I'm going to use it, but I would actually really like perhaps if we could maybe as a society start to veer away from cultured lawns. Eco-deserts basically is what I call them, and we can actually start being messier humans and actually start letting things grow. This is just my little kind of side hustle. I dream, and I'm still executing, but I would really like to start a community apiary. So similar to a community garden, there's actually a community apiary where people come and keep bees with me. It really mitigates a lot of risk for new beekeepers. It actually is cost effective because you just join a club as part of a membership. And yes, there's worker, queen, and drone memberships. And then of course you just come, and when you can actually get involved as much as you want or as little as you want. And there's just a lot of less risk basically involved, especially in the biosecurity side as well. So not shaming any new beekeepers, but swarming is a thing. And swarming can sometimes end up in people's houses and people's trunks. And I would just honestly like to reduce that kind of human-bee interaction so we can keep it in the good, not the bad. And then of course, biosecurity as well. So bees can actually pass on diseases to other bees. And then of course, well, including bumblebees, but of course other honeybees as well. And then of course, just community and encouraging more citizen science, which I love. So I actually take kids out. This was a picture from a kids camp that I was assisting with. And I actually took these children in bathing suits and flip-flops out to a bee colony. Now I do actually keep them really gentle and really happy, but we get all suited up and we get the smokers going, and the kids are literally up in there smoking the bees, patting them. And then of course, they're a little nervous in the beginning, but when it's all said and done, we come back and at least a handful, well, not even a handful, many dozens of times actually, I hear, I want to be a beekeeper when I grow up. And I'm like, yes. It's great. And yeah, it is just such an important thing to expose the youth to multiple things, the same way that I was doing it in university, right? And it, of course, is very rewarding for me to just share the enthusiasm. And to be honest, and for the record, no one got stung by honeybees, but they got stung by wasps. Couldn't quite do anything much about that, but I am going to cover wasps. So the presentation overview, we're going to actually just briefly discuss Hymenoptera and how actually bees and wasps and ants are all related, how to tell the difference between them. We're going to then talk about the 7 families of bees specifically, and then we're going to talk about managed and wild pollinators, and then of course, I can't help myself, we're going to talk a little bit about honeybees because that is what I can just talk a lot about in case we need more time, which I doubt. So here's a comprehensive guide to yellow stripy things. A lot of people, this crowd accepted, actually just see yellow stripy and they fly around and they get really nervous. A bee, it's gonna sting me. And I just, honestly, I implore people to take a moment and maybe kind of just see what kind of insect you're dealing with. So up here, the carpenter bee, they're like B-52s. They sound like helicopters when they come in. They drill holes in your soffit. They literally have no time for you. They're harmless. All they want to do is just live on their life, and they live in your fence. They will fly aggressively to try to scare you away, but they really mean no harm. The honeybees, they're not necessarily the bee that actually needs help the most, and I'll address that later. They are excellent pollinators to an extent. They are very friendly, and they actually can indeed only sting once. The bumblebees are, don't tell the honeybees, my actual favorite. Try not to pick favorites, but they are amazing. They're really gentle. They are social, but they live in smaller colonies. So fat, it shouldn't be able to fly. Physics has since disproven that. And actually, you can pet it. I've petted bumblebees before, and what they do, they'll stick up a little leg, and you can actually high-five the leg even. It's pretty great. The kids love it. And then, of course, they are actually indeed flying pandas. And then we have the syrphid fly, so that's the hoverfly. It's not even a bee at all. It's a bee mimic, so that's a way of it ensuring it doesn't actually get eaten by birds and other insects. And of course, they just kind of want to hang out. They visit flowers, and honestly, I've had some just land on me because I guess they, as they say, it will follow you if it likes you. Continuing on, we have the paper wasp. They can be fairly aggressive, but it's only just because they are actually territorial. Most wasps are very territorial, and that's where those paper hanging wasp nests are actually one of the best ways at deterring wasps from actually building a nest where you don't want them to. They definitely have no concept of personal space, especially if you irritate them. Yellow jackets are actually invasive species, and they do tend to be a menace. They are actually what most people are like, oh, a bee like landed in my soda, or a bee tried to eat my hot dog. It's actually a wasp, and it's predominantly yellow jackets. I'll explain why in a few slides, but they definitely will fight you for it. And they will sting you just for the heck of it. For the record, I've been stung. I actually do wasp removal as well. And the stings are nowhere near that of a honeybee, so it's just kind of like, oh, is that all you got? They can sting over and over again, but whatever. And they are sometimes just jerks because they actually eat other bees as well. I'm not sure if anyone's seen a cicada killer in action, but cicadas are quite large. These things are relentless. They tend not to bother us too much, but they definitely pick and choose their prey, and it's the tough old cicada, so those poor guys. And then we have the dirt or mud dauber. The mud dauber actually is a different type of bee. They actually live in those, I'm not sure if you've seen, it's kind of like those church organ pipe looking sort of mud nests up against brick. That's actually the mud dauber. They're really quite friendly, and they just honestly mind their business. The dirt daubers are somewhat similar. They actually live on the ground. And I mean, they are pretty cool looking. That really distinctive wasp waist is actually something else that you can look out for. So a little bit of dry science for everyone. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but ants, sawflies, wasps, and bees actually all live they actually all belong to the same order. And that's basically just mostly because of their morphology. But then, yes, they do actually share a lot of ancient history as well. And so Hymenoptera just means membrane and then wings. So there's actually 4 membranous wings. There's 2 forewings and 2 hindwings that give them their distinction there. And then, of course, the majority of them actually either sting or bite. So if you think about an ant bite that's filled with formic acid, that's what actually really hurts quite a lot. So the stinger's in an ant's face as opposed to where the ovipositor is. And so dating all the way back, let's go all the way back to when the Earth was just a wee thing. Sawflies are indeed the oldest lineage. I'm not sure if people know what sawflies look like. I should have included a picture, but they are oftentimes really, really big. They have a really, really long ovipositor, and they are believed to be kind of the original Hymenoptera, about 250 million years ago. And then, of course, we had parasitic wasps come next. And then we have the stinging wasps, and then it's kind of theorized because, again, we have to take it easy on scientists. They're trying to piece together, information based on like a little piece of a toe, basically, right? Or like a footprint. So they then theorized that stingless bees came after the ants and carbonid wasps in the early Cretaceous. And then, of course, during the early Cretaceous, actually then yielded more speciation. And that was basically when Western Gondwana land, so that's Africa and South America, current continents right now, have actually begun to split. And then, of course, and that's where all the major lineage of bees have come from. So you'll find that a lot of the bees from similar families will exist in, say, South America, and then oddly enough, Africa, and then sometimes even Australia, because they had started to evolve when the landmass was together, and then as it started to separate and become kind of more island, like chunks of land, that's when speciation really actually started to kick off, because it was literally the smaller land mass. And this is a really useless graph, sorry. It is just to actually show the rise of the angiosperms. So angiosperms are actually flowering trees and plants. Gymnosperms were actually considered to be well before angiosperms. So gymnosperms are your conifers. Conifers do yield pollen. However, the rise of angiosperms, so flowers, is actually what drove a lot of insect evolution. And of course, as we know about evolution, they evolved together quite intensely as well. Very fascinating, a whole other lecture on angiosperm evolution. But just for the record, let it be known, nectar is actually really, really costly for plants to produce. It's a lot of water and it's a lot of sugar. And so that nectar is actually what has to draw in basically the cupid that the plants need. So the nectar is the attractant, and then of course the pollen are the gametes in which the plant needs that cupid to pass to other flowers, in so much that fertilization can occur. So nectar is very, very costly, but it really does pay off. The trees obviously can't get up and go find a mate, so they have to attract the bees that are going to help them, cross gametes, basically. So then, of course, not all pollinators are actually bees. There are also butterflies and beetles, lots of birds and bats, wasps, and flies as well. And of course, I know I've missed many other creatures. So again, just kind of reiterating the difference between wasps and bees. Wasps, again, this is the whole thing about diversity, is that when you say wasps tend to be bigger, there's actually really small wasps as well. So this is kind of just a loose guide. They tend to be a little bit bigger. They are definitely less furry. They're not as intense of pollen collectors like bees are. They're actually more smooth-bodied, and they are actually more drawn to feeding on nectar. They're way more aggressive and much more territorial than your average bee, let's be honest. And then, of course, adult wasps actually require nectar, and then they actually also do hunt other insects for prey. Bees then tend to be a little bit smaller. They're a little bit more robust and round-shaped. They're, of course, very fuzzy. They tend to be less aggressive, caveat. And then, of course, they feed on only nectar and pollen, usually. So the bees versus wasps thing, again, I try to people to kind of just take their time and see who's actually bothering them, because knowledge is best, it's best used when you can learn more, I guess. And then kind of, I was going to say know your enemy, but know who you're dealing with. And so, yeah, they're incredible foragers and scavengers and hunters. Wasps will come in and basically just take chunks of carrion if they can. And the reason behind that is that it's actually their young, their larvae actually need animal protein. Not necessarily the adults. The adults will feast on animal protein sometimes, but they're predominantly nectar drinkers. And the wasps are actually that voracious because they're trying to get protein for their larvae, basically. And yeah, so that's why they kind of come for your burgers and your hot dogs while you're at a barbecue. And so we're just going to enter now into discussing the bees of the world. Again, I would probably need 5 days to go through all the bees of the world. But this is the wonderful thing about the time that we're living in, is that we are actually still able to witness so much biodiversity. And so what I tell people is that if you can think something up, just imagine all these kind of like pieces and you mash them together, it probably actually does exist in nature right now, which is fantastic. So bees are actually kind of grouped together into 7 different families based basically on their morphology, their social organization, their kind of behaviors, the way they build their nests, whether or not they're social or solitary. They can be generalists and specialists all at once. So again, the combinations out there are wild. They can be blue and they can be green. Sometimes they don't even have stripes. Now you catch my drift, hopefully. So bee biodiversity is actually also just something, as I said, if you can think it, it probably exists out there. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if we've discovered actually all the bee species out there, hopefully before some of them go extinct as well. But this is one of the examples that I really like to trot out. Basically, it is an orchid from the Middle East, and it basically tricks the male longhorned bee. So that's its kind of specialized pollinator. It tricks the male longhorned bee basically into coming in to mate with this flower. And the way that this orchid does that is it not only looks like the female longhorned bee, but it actually also smells like her. So I'm not sure, plants don't have eyeballs or noses, but it is through the course of evolution, through phytochemicals, trial and error, through that course of evolution, that this orchid has figured out how to smell like the female version of its pollinator. Everybody, but again, if you can dream it, it exists in the bee world. This is a cuckoo bee, so I know there's like other cuckoo kind of birds. They basically are just parasites. They basically let anyone else and everyone else do all the work. This is the cuckoo bee. They actually do live in Maryland. And they basically just sneak in, so they're 5 millimeters in size. They sneak into other bee nests. They eat the eggs out of whatever the nest is in that nest. They lay their own eggs, leave the bees to raise their own cuckoo bees. And of course, if I just wanted to point out, this joker, its mouth parts are really wild. Like they don't necessarily even need to forage for themselves because they don't really have any young to rear. So they kind of just have like these kind of gnashing mouth parts because they actually literally eat other bees' eggs and larvae. So again, this is a bit of a sneaky bee, but it exists. This chap by the name of Sam Droge down here, he is just an amazing bee scientist. I suggest you follow him on Instagram. He has a lab that takes amazing pictures. And to be honest, the majority of the following close-up pictures are actually his pictures. So just briefly touching into the 7 bee families, we have Adrenidae. Those are the mining or digging bees. We have Apidae. They are the flower visitors predominantly. Well, everyone visits flowers, sorry. The Collectidae, so they're plaster, cellophane, and polyester bees. Halicidae are the sweat bees. Megachilidae are leafcutter, mason, and resin bees. Melitidae are the melitids, so they don't really get a common name. And then the Stenotritidae, I'm not sure if I said that properly, I think I did, the swift and comb-bearer bees. So the Adrenidae are known as the mining and digging bees. There's about 3,000 of them, and then about half of that actually species are in North America. They are solitary, they're really abundant first thing in spring, and they're ground nesting. They're specifically adapted, again, to pollinate certain flowering plants. And of course, you can find them in Western North America, and then no surprises, South America, Europe, and Africa, again, going back to the split of the continents. And then some of the examples include really nifty ones, Cragen's mining bee and the Canadian mining bee. I'm not even going to attempt the scientific names right now. This fantastic specimen is Cragen's mining bee. It's actually a specialist of pollinating apples, especially in the New York region, in the eastern US, but this wild native pollinator is just spectacular. They have really hairy back legs, as you can see. Most pollen collecting bees and resin collecting bees actually have really flat back legs where they pack pollen grains into. It's actually called a corbicula or a pollen basket. Fantastic, really hairy, really big eyes, usually really long antennae. So Apidae is mostly the bees that we know and love. It is the largest family, so over 5,700 species, or sorry, 5,700, wait. sorry, it's the same. Both social and solitary, and they're actually extremely diverse. They're invaluable pollinators of countless plant species. That includes trees and shrubs, and of course the foods that we like to eat. And then several examples actually include honeybees, bumblebees, your carpenter bees, and stingless bees, which actually do exist. They're down in South America, and they're in the tribe Meliponini. This is a female longhorned bee from all the way from Florida. My current obsession is actually longhorn bees. They have this kind of marbled eye, and as the name implies, they have really long antennae. But the most special and adorable thing about longhorn bees is that they're literally wearing like those leg warmers from the 80s, right? Like they've got those big, like furry stockings, and that's for optimum pollen collection. But you can spot them a mile away if you actually know to look for their nifty little leg warmers. They tend to be solitary, so the females actually build their own nests. This, however, is a photo of two male longhorn bees just cuddling together in a flower. They kind of end up being roommates for the night, and they kind of cuddle together to keep warm. They have actually been known to have sleepover parties in flowers for quite a while. It's really cute. Oh, anyway, collect today are the plaster, polyester, and cellophane bees. There's about 2,600 species. They're actually almost exclusively solitary, with some exceptions, of course. And then they're found mainly in Australia and South America. There's 55 species of bees actually found in Canada. Oddly enough, almost half of that actually occurs in Alberta. I tried to find out why. I think it's an evolutionary and then habitat thing, but don't quote me. I can't really tell you, sorry. Uniquely though, the females actually have this forked tongue, in so much that they then spread this kind of like resin, sort of cellophane style, it's a resin that then makes a cellophane sort of coating on the inside of their nests. And that's actually for waterproofing, and then to keep kind of spores and bacteria down as well. Some examples include the spine-shouldered cellophane bee, and of course the modest masked bee. And there is her forked tongue. And this is actually a really good opportunity to show you the two compound eyes on each side of the head. But then most bees have three kind of simpler eyes. They're called ocelli, and they're actually on the top of their heads. And that's used for navigation. So bees actually have 5 eyes. Alicidae are really cool. I'm not sure if you guys have seen a sweat bee. They're really kind of small. They'll land on you and just like lick you and love you. Like there's nothing to be scared of. I literally had one licking my armpit, and I unfortunately closed my armpit and I got stung. Didn't really hurt. She survived. Everyone's fine. I was fine too. And they're the second largest family. They're definitely, as I said, very docile. And they actually have usually a metallic sheen, either of blue or green most of the time. They typically forage at dusk, and then of course they range from social to solitary, but then it's actually also kind of dictated by their environment. So in a harsher environment, they tend to be more social. Interesting that, hey? And then actually in 2018, Toronto made the metallic green sweat bee the official bee of Toronto, which was pretty cool, and I think is a great step forward into raising more awareness. Megachilidae, really, really funny bees. Honestly, I'm very fond of them as well. They are the mason, leafcutter, and carder bees. They're the 3rd largest bee family, about 4,000 species, and then it makes up about 15 to 20% of the world's bee population, and they are found on almost every continent except for the Antarctic. They actually have really large heads and then big mandibles, and that's mostly just for the work that they do. So as the name implies, the leaf cutters cut leaves. I'll show you more about that later. But they actually have to have really big heads and mouth parts to then be able to build the nests that they make. And so they use all sorts of materials, including leaves and plant resin, gravel. They've been actually witnessed, kind of depressingly enough, using plastic bags. And then, of course, they build their nests inside basically anything they can find, including insect nests, snail shells, rocks, and termite nests. This is what is considered officially the world's largest bee, the Wallace's giant bee, and it's in the Megachile family. See those mandibles? They're pretty darn big, sorry. Yeah, they're pretty big too, because there's a bumblebee there for scale, and the bumblebee is essentially just the size of this bee's thorax. So imagine coming across one of those in Indonesia. And it'd be pretty terrifying. I would probably be asking to get stung, but anyway, I digress. Melicidae, there's actually no common names. They're not actually all that common. They're the second smallest bee family with only 201 species. They're solitary, they're ground nesters, and they're really kind of tightly evolved to really specific plants. And then oddly enough, they're very common in Africa, South Africa, and then there's actually 4 species that have been described in North America. This is a wonderful example of one of the 4 species in North America, the blunt-horned bee, and she's a specialist of deerberry in Vermont. And you can see she's actually got a really good collection of resin on her back leg with a little fluff of something. Maybe it's from the deerberry, I'm not sure, but she was on her way probably back to her nest. Again, big eyes, a little bit reduced antennae, but they're oftentimes just really, really hairy. And then the Stenotritidae. So those are known as swift or comb-bearer bees. They are the smallest bee family with 21 species. They're solitary, they nest in the ground up to the depths of about 10 feet, which is quite impressive. No wonder they're not seen very often. They fly really fast, they're pretty big, and they actually are found only in Australia. They're thought to have then split from the Collectidae over 92 million years ago. And there's those handsome down under, or chaps from down under. And again, with the hairy back leg, really, really flat for pollen collection, big eyes, and just beautiful coloration for sure. So we're going to move into managed pollinators. I'm going to, again, just try to keep the pace going a little bit. Not too much left now. So managed pollinators, as I'm sure we are all familiar with, our agriculture system is basically, put plainly, looking to increase yield at an exponential rate. And in most biological systems, there is no increased yield because there's this thing called negative feedback that keeps things in check. Unfortunately, now with current technology, a lot of big ag, let's just say, has gotten so commercialized that it's barely recognizable anymore. But along with big ag, actually comes with the need for pollination. So in that sense, a lot of bee species, several bee species have actually been kind of dragged into the mix as well to become commercial pollinators, unfortunately. So in a really vast chunk of monoculture, there's really nothing else to not only to feed on, but to actually also live in, which is basically why you have to then introduce managed pollinators in order to ensure the pollination of that monoculture. There's literally nothing else. Some examples of major commercial crops. I'm sure there's a few favorites there. I know I like coffee and macadamia nuts, pumpkins, everything. I like everything. The picture here is actually groves of almonds in California, and it's just an endless sea of the same plant. And of course, mostly honeybees are trucked in by the thousands to then just strictly pollinate this one species of plant. And for the record, almond nectar is not very nutritious. It actually contains a precursor of cyanide because it's in the rose family. So it's not very healthy for those honeybees either. Managed pollinators, so there's, again, a few I'm just going to touch on because I could be here all night. We have the bumblebees, we have mason bees, alfalfa leafcutter bees, and of course the honeybees. And that's the kind of the 4 major ones that are used in Canada. I really hope I don't get emotional, but the managed bumblebees are just a bit of a nightmare once you peek behind the curtain. I've actually gone down to see some of the commercial bumblebee boxes down in Leamington and how they're used and, let's just be honest, abused in the greenhouse production business. Bumblebees are indeed #1 species that are used in greenhouses because they don't get as disoriented as honeybees do in an enclosed space. And they're actually also really good pollinators of specific kinds of greenhouse plants. Thankfully, when commercial bumblebees were kind of originally introduced to Ontario, they've actually now started in commercial greenhouse pollination. They've actually started using bumblebees that are native to Ontario. When they first started, they were actually using a European bumblebee, and it was causing a lot of problems actually. So now, thankfully, we've kind of shifted things. They're actually using native species from Ontario, Bombus impatiens. And then, of course, once the pollination is complete, these boxes of bumblebees just get thrown in the garbage. They don't even get to live out their life cycle. They really don't necessarily live a good life. They end up in the garbage. A lot of escapees, the ones that don't perish, actually then make it out into the wild, where they oftentimes can spread disease and then actually outcompete other bumblebees. And as I mentioned, they actually used a certain species from Europe that was actually coming in. Sorry, when the boxes were thrown out, those invasive sort of non-native bumblebees were actually also causing problems for the native populations in Ontario. I hope that made sense. So bumblebees, again, they're kind of choice greenhouse pollinators, particularly in the nightshade family. So you've got your tomatoes and then eggplants. And then they're really good pollinators for cucumbers, sweet peppers, and strawberries. Anthrodehiscence is actually this phenomenon where the anthers of a flower actually need to be vibrated in order for it to kind of release its pollen. And bumblebees, thankfully, actually pack enough of a big old buzz in order to be able to do that. So if you're in your garden and you actually see a bumblebee visiting one of your tomato flowers, you can hear it, and it's actually like vibrating it to actually release the pollen out of it. Honeybees don't do that. They don't really pack that punch. And so, yeah, that's basically why bumblebees are actually also doubly good to use in greenhouses. Unfortunately, sorry, but greenhouses are actually also generally really sterile environments, allowing little room for anything else to exist except for the monoculture that's being grown. And I know I'm very much well aware that we also need to eat. And of course, if looking into kind of the crystal ball, I believe controlled environments such as a greenhouse is probably going to become more and more popular as the climate becomes more unpredictable. We have managed mason bees. So the blue orchard bee is actually the most common of mason bees that are used for blueberry and orchard fruit pollination, basically in Ontario. It is native to Ontario, and they actually are solitary bees in so much that they use hollow stems for cavity nesting, in so much that they'll actually they'll collect pollen, they'll put a little pollen ball in, they'll lay an egg on top of the pollen ball, and then they'll wall it off with some mud. And that's what actually gives them the name the mason bee. And you can kind of see there's a few cells in a row here. Honeybees, again, they're not the greatest of pollinators. They kind of get a little distracted. They're a little chaotic. They pollinate about 5% of the flowers that they land on, while mason bees actually have a success rate up to 95%. So even if you actually have a few honeybee colonies kicking around your orchard, you really want to actually encourage either bring in mason bees or encourage their natural habitat. And that's actually because mason bees only forage for pollen, as I mentioned, to actually have that little ball to lay their egg on. They're exceptionally efficient pollinators of all sorts of your favorite fruits. And yeah, raspberries, all the things listed here. And then of course, a lot of flowers in the rose family. These are what could be considered managed mason bees. Basically, this is a block of wood with holes in it, strapped into a bucket and then strapped up into an orchard. But sometimes that's really all it takes, especially when we are not leaving enough habitat for the mason bees. They will just go for it. We have a managed alfalfa leafcutter bee. There are other kinds of leafcutter bees as well, but as the name implies, they really like cutting out little holes. Rose leaves are actually some of their favorite leaves to use. They are not native to Canada, but they are indeed a really effective pollinator of alfalfa crops. And so alfalfa is generally harvested for livestock before it blooms, but then of course we all know, hopefully, that we actually also need alfalfa seed in order to plant. And so then that's where pollination becomes really important. That's when you bring in a ton of alfalfa leafcutter bees. They're really actually also very good at pollinating wild blueberries. And so here's the really impressive Megachilidae. She is actually cutting out with her really strong mandibles a chunk of leaf. And you can see her really furry undercarriage that she tends to like to stick up. And then of course she will make little rolls of these leaves and then actually lay her eggs inside with, again, a pollen ball. And so we humans have figured out actually how to produce large amounts of alfalfa leafcutter bees. Usually it's about 40,000 to 60,000 per acre of alfalfa, and then of course other crops that are actually required. That's how many bees are required per acre to pollinate the crop. Of course, we figured out how to synchronize the bloom of the alfalfa up to the emergence of the leafcutter bees, in so much that when they're all hatching, the flowers are ready and it's go time. And so the majority of alfalfa leafcutter bees are actually kept in these orange or blue huts. And you can actually see here, these are the boards in which the holes, the cavities that the leafcutter bees use to then lay their eggs. And then while they're out, obviously foraging for the pollen, that's when pollination occurs. And so once the pollination is all finished, the managers actually take the boards out and they kind of shake all of these little rolled up eggs into a sorting machine that sorts the diseased and the dead from the healthy. And they actually, literally, they use just like aluminum garbage cans to store these little cells. So they basically kind of induce winter for the prepupa that are inside these little rolled up balls. So they kind of put them in cold storage. They kind of mimic winter. And then when it's time then for the alfalfa to bloom again, that's actually when they start incubating these little cells. They hatch the bees, and then they actually then introduce the bees back to the alfalfa field, and we take it from there. Managed honeybees. So honeybees are actually not native to North America. They were imported from Europe by English settlers as early as 1622. And then, of course, along with the honeybees, because they made honey, they made really great beeswax candles, and a lot of the settlers actually brought over not only their own livestock, but actually also their own plants for food and beverage, forage for their own livestock, for medicine, and then, of course, flowers for their very nice British gardens. And so there's a lot of examples here. Periwinkle, as we all know, is a bit of a nemesis. Plantain, purple loosestrife, all the things that we're kind of familiar now as ditch plants, basically. And to be honest, like a lot of these things, except for, well, periwinkle's okay in the spring. It's one of the first bloomers. A lot of them yield actually a lot of really nice nectar, but that's actually just more for the honeybees that live here. Managed honeybees are obviously the top commercial pollinators. They're really easy to manage, and they have been industrialized for many, many years now. They don't actually do the best of jobs. As I said, they don't do very well in an enclosed space. And they actually also practice this thing called flower fidelity. So when a honeybee finds a really good source of food, so nectar or pollen, she'll come back and she'll share a sample of that and then do this waggle dance to then communicate where that source came from. And she'll share that information with a bunch of other workers, and they'll actually go and basically tap that one resource before they move on to another one. So if you have some delicious white clover in your apple orchard at the same time the apples are blooming, the honeybees might actually go for the clover and not the apples. So that might be a bit of a problem as well. There's an estimated almost 800,000 colonies in Canada as of last year, and a whopping 2.5 million colonies, those are boxes of bees, in the United States. Just a quick thing, a little sidebar. I, as a scientist, I really do actually like to find the middle ground between like big ag and beekeepers. We all can actually just kind of work together a little bit more. I grew up in a farming background in Meaford, mostly apples and pigs. And so it's really important to actually appeal to both sides. So now, I mean, farming has never been easy, but now really, really big cash crop operations are really, really quite hard. They're so dependent on so many chemicals. I digress. But when, you know, at my old house, when my neighbor was spraying, I actually just went up to him. I'm like, could you let me know when you're going to spray, and I'll just keep my bees inside? Or you can actually spray as the sun is going down, because all my bees will be at home, and then you'll have the nighttime for everything to settle, and then my bees won't have to die. But guess what? The farmer doesn't actually also want my bees to die, because it's been shown that even in the case of corn and soy, the farmers can actually experience an increase of almost 20% in yield in their soy beans due to the pollination services that the honeybees provide. So it's kind of like, yeah, we got to work this one out for the best, and then hopefully everyone's happy and no bees are dead. Just touching briefly on pesticides and the subject of that, as I said, there are ways to actually reduce mortality. And then, of course, it depends on what the farmer is using. So glyphosate, as we all know, is not the greatest, but it's still fairly heavily used. And it actually changes the environment of the honeybee's gut. I did a few projects on this at the university. And then once the kind of symbiosis or the balance of a honeybee's gut is compromised, that actually then leads it open to getting more diseased and sicker, basically. And honeybee immunity is a really interesting subject. As I mentioned, honeybees actually also visit corn. And unfortunately, not a lot of studies have actually been done on the synergistic effects of, say, a fungicide with a neonicotinoid. So say if you're a foraging bee and you've encountered a neonic somewhere like imidacloprid out in the wild, when you're out foraging, or actually when you're put in a managed situation, you bring that back to the nest. Beeswax is actually also really absorptive, like it holds on to chemicals as well. And so then that might not affect the bee, but if a bee then goes back out and encounters a fungicide of some sort, brings that back, the combination of the pesticide and the fungicide can actually be extremely toxic. We actually literally don't really know. So again, things are just being kind of sprayed willy-nilly, and quite often we actually haven't even studied the synergistic effects of that. So again, we can do better. Adding honeybees to your field, I'm just going to kind of breeze by this a little bit because I'm mindful of the time. Honeybees can actually navigate up to a 3-kilometer radius, so they can kind of reach far and wide. I'm always on the lookout for canola fields where I live. Canola honey is disgusting. So I really want to make sure, that there's actually like no canola growing where my bees can actually reach it, because then I'm going to make sure I take it out. And then, of course, depending on what you're growing, then it's actually called hive stocking. So these are just kind of charts that show how many colonies or hive per acre, depending on what you're growing. For dwarf apples, 3 hives per acre. We've got pears, plums, nectarines, cherries, apricots, my favorite. And then, of course, you've got your smaller fruit crops, raspberries, and all the like. So again, to overload, like to have too many honeybee colonies per acre is not really effective. You're going to starve the bees out, you're going to stress them, and then of course they probably won't be as effective at doing their job. Again, all pollinated by honeybees, ginseng, alfalfa, buckwheat, we all know how important a lot of these crops are. This is me. My head's cut off because I'm pretty tall, sorry. But if you actually are planning a really big crop, if you're a farmer and you're planning a really big crop that actually also requires pollination, I implore you to actually like check in with a beekeeper. If you're growing a massive crop of buckwheat and you need the buckwheat for seed, invite a beekeeper in, because that beekeeper will actually get a lot of buckwheat honey. Same with flax. Flax is more wind pollinated now. But sunflowers, white clover, on and on. I actually find a mixture of buckwheat and sunflower honey to be really, really tasty. Honeybees and native pollinators, what we all know now is that we actually need a diverse range of pollinators, and not just of bees, but of wasps and birds and beetles and bats and everybody, moths and butterflies. They're a crucial part of our food chain as well. So a lot of birds, fish, everyone. It's a food chain. We all know about the importance of that. Of course, trees actually also bloom, but they're so tall that we literally don't see them. But I've actually experienced collecting maple pollen. So honeybees can actually go up and visit maple flowers, and they'll bring in maple pollen, and it actually tastes like maple syrup. It's really quite nice. And then, of course, there's the economic, or the economy. Sorry. Anyway. So in 2022, the honeybees themselves actually contributed between $4 to $5 billion to the Canadian economy and pollination services alone. And then, of course, to quantify how much the native pollinators actually then added to that, it would be out of this world. But I don't really know the importance of biodiversity, and then actually preserving biodiversity is when we're supposed to all feel rich, not necessarily by dollar cents. Unfortunately, pollinators are actually kind of in a dire situation. Habitat loss, of course, continuously drives reduction in biodiversity. I'm just going to touch on briefly, hopefully not get too emotional, but about a third of our entire bumblebee population in North America has actually moderately or severely declined already. The rusty patch bumblebee is a really good example. It's now really, really rare in Ontario, and has probably, within the past 25 years, has reduced by 87%. And there she is. She's beautiful. And so they are excellent pollinators. As I said, honeybees are not native to North America, but bumblebees are. So again, it's that kind of flower pollinator specific relationship that has been developed. So bumblebees are actually really good at pollinating, like superior pollinators of a lot of native plants here in North America. And then of course, it is now officially joining the staggering amount of other species on the Ontario's endangered species list. This is just a map, really briefly. On the left, it was actually in 1995 showing the amount of this one neonicotinoid called imidacloprid, the use in 95. And so light pink is lighter, but then red is actually heavier use. And then less than, I guess, what that would be 20 years later, imidacloprid is actually used a lot more. So neonicotinoids became way more common as the bumblebees were also declining. Just a quick touch on, because I do need to give them serious props. Bumblebee identification is hard and really fun. So if you want to get into it, there's a lot of really good guides out there now. And so you'll see the rusty patches in the rare and declining species box there. The orange belted bumblebee, and then of course the red belted bumblebee is not to be confused with the rusty patched bumblebee. I've done it. I've gotten way too excited and then realized it was just, boring old red belted bumblebee. Beware too that it is complicated, but actually also really, really fun. I try to encourage everyone to get a really good picture of the abdomen and, well, of course, the thorax as well. As you can see, even with just the red belted bumblebee, the queens have a bunch of color morphs to it. Same with the workers, and then the males. They all look different. So you might think that you're actually looking at a specific kind of bee, but even the red belted bumblebee workers sometimes don't even have a red belt. We can all pitch in to actually help pollinators, so we can bring back the rusty patched bumblebee. I have great faith that we can. Farmers can actually just leave hedgerows. You don't necessarily need to have your farm going all the way up to that last tree line. It's okay. You can leave a little bit for, we can all share. It's not a big deal. It's going to be okay. Again, biodiversity to me is money in the bank. And so, of course, when you leave patches of habitat, that actually also allows the proper environment for insects to overwinter, and then, of course, proper nutrition to thrive. So obviously, if you're gardening out there, I implore everyone to actually not mulch everything. As again, I kind of exposed everyone to the idea that there's a lot of bees who are actually ground nesters, and it's really impossible for a tiny little Andrenidae to basically dig her little tunnel if there's like 2 feet of mulch on top. So it's okay if you particularly come across like a nice little sandy or loose soil patch in your garden. You can leave it bare and just watch it go. I took these pictures on the outskirts of an old planted pine forest, but there was this little plasterer bee just happily just doing her thing out there, and it was great to see. Again, we can let the ditches grow. If you're farming, you can actually use cover crops and stuff to give the bees a little boost. And then, of course, you can leave some other wild areas in more urban areas as well. This is my picture again. I'm just pointing out, this is just a ditch kind of closer to Clarksburg. And there's bird's foot trefoil, chicory, and wild sweet pea. None of them are actually native to North America, but they still provide a lot actually for our pollinators. And it's a lot better than just being mowed down, so. We can encourage wild pollinators, again, as I said. I'm going to kind of just hop over this, but the Save the Bees campaign should actually be upgraded to Save the Pollinators, because I think a lot of people, when they think Save the Bees, that just means honeybees. But again, we got to broaden our horizons. Really cute little squash bee. They're actually specialized in native to North America, and they are experts at pollinating in your garden. They're solitary, they're stingless, and they live in the ground. And they'll do the work for you. These two were depicted in the posters. Does anyone want to take a stab at who's on the left? A bumblebee? Yeah, yes. And then how about on the right? Yes. Great. He's actually even got a little fuzzy face, right? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. So on the left here is the bumblebee, and then on the right is your longhorned bee. And again, the antennae really give it away. and the marbled eye, and just the overall cuteness. So again, if you want to encourage more wild pollinators, you can build mason and leafcutter bee houses. Just try to minimize the amount of plastic that you use. You can have an overhang to protect them from the elements. Replaceable tubes, you can actually use just old like bamboo pieces or pieces of hemp. You can roll up cardboard, and then of course you then have to provide them with some nesting materials like mud and leaves, and then of course you can replace them after they come out in the spring. So you can encourage just a little bit more of a setting for them as well. And honestly, it's good to be messy. We can just be a little bit less tidy in our gardens as well, and in our parks. So this is just kind of a hodgepodge of a stack that is just honestly provides what a lot of pollinators actually need. The benefits of insect biodiversity, I cannot emphasize this enough. So not only growing a diverse mix of flowering plants actually offers extended food that then signals to the insects that it's actually okay to start bedding down or nesting as well. And so if you actually provide a successional period of bloom, more beneficial insects will actually be able to start coming. And so here, you actually get a lot of biocontrol in your garden as well. So your predatory syrphid fly, that yellow stripy thing at the beginning, the bee mimic, their larvae love eating aphids. And then of course you have your parasitoid braconid wasp eggs. So the adult braconid will actually lay eggs on the back of a tomato hornworm caterpillar. And that's actually what all those white things are just eggs waiting to hatch. And then when they hatch into larvae, they'll eat the hornworm. It's pretty gnarly, but honestly, a lot of predatory wasps are amazing. There's a certain ichneummonid wasp. It's a predatory wasp. It's actually now being used to control the emerald ash borer out west. And so just a side note, we have the adults that are actually going to be laying the eggs, and then they hatch into the larva, but the adult syrphid fly and the braconid wasp actually also require pollen and nectar to survive. So that's why we try to provide enough successional blooms to encourage their habitat and then their life cycle. This is a really big chunk of information, but you can just pause it later on. This is, again, I do like to kind of provide some suggestions as to what you can plant when it comes to certain plants in your garden. There's a whole list here of wonderful, wonderful native species. This list is provided by one of my favorite scientists. Her name is Heather Holm. We're just waiting for a photo in the back. And then, of course, I just wanted to touch on the importance of larval host species. So basically, you can plant all the flowers that you want, and you'll attract all the adult pollinators. But larval host species are actually also really important. So when, again, the insect is young, when it's in its larval or caterpillar stage, it actually has a completely different set of needs, basically. It has a completely different diet. So if you think about monarch caterpillars, their larval host species is indeed the milkweed. So it's a similar kind of idea. An example, the false foxglove sun moth, also known as an owlet moth, actually almost feeds exclusively on smooth yellow false foxglove and fern-leaved yellow false foxglove. Both of those plant species are actually now at risk in Ontario. So no surprise, when there's such a really tight connection between plant and pollinator, if one goes, the other one tends to go as well. So the false foxglove sun moth has actually been now put on, unfortunately, it's now definitely on the endangered list, and it's declined probably both as, double down. It's lost its oak-dominated savanna, and then of course the host plants that it needs to actually complete its life cycle. Yeah. So we're going to finish up. I'm just going to blather a little bit about honeybees because honestly, it's my jam. They are really, really quite interesting little characters. So honeybees, as I mentioned, they communicate through multiple forms of little dances that we call. There's the waggle dance that actually not only communicates what the bees are foraging on, but they actually share samples of the food, but actually also indicates distance and direction in this little kind of vibrational dance that they do. And then their fellow nestmates know how to interpret that dance, and they'll actually go out and forage and find the same source of food. Honeybees now, they're greatly studied. They're kind of like the white lab mice in most of the insect studies that are performed. honeybees have been studied a lot in science. But now the studies have shown that they're actually capable of facial recognition. And I swear, like, my bees definitely recognize me when I go to the bee yard. I feel pretty special. They've actually been studied to be self-medicating. So if they're actually struggling with some sort of fungal or bacterial infection, they'll kind of up, say, if there's a flowering thyme or a flowering oregano, they'll up those visits and actually collect a lot more of that like medicinal nectar or medicinal pollen. They're highly eusocial, so they actually have 3 castes, worker, queen, and drone. Very, very specific, and honestly, we don't even know half of it, I swear. But really, really diverse division of labor. It's all kind of controlled through genetics, but there's actually also like decision making. Like, it's a really sophisticated little thing that they've got going on. Their physiology is really quite amazing. As I mentioned, they have 5 eyes. They actually have 2 brains. They're called mushroom bodies. Honeybees will have a mushroom body in the head and then another one in the thorax. One time my hive tool slipped and I accidentally beheaded a worker bee. And unfortunately, I actually kind of watched for a little bit too long. She found her head, so she was still using her second brain. She found her head, turned it over, tried to attach it, turned it over again, tried to attach it. And I was just watching this. And then some nest mates came up and started licking her stump. And then they actually tried to attach her head again. And they were like licking and like, they're moving her head around. And I'm like, all right, I can't take this. And I put her out of her misery. But I don't even know how long. I was probably watching for at least 2 minutes and she was still going, like, kind of like a chicken with her head cut off. One thing I kind of came to a realization about 8 years ago, and if you actually look at kind of like certain ecological systems, basically, usually, so say when a deer eats grass, it can kind of eat too much grass and maybe kill that grass. And then wolves need to eat deer, so then the life is actually sacrificed as well. Honeybees and other bees are kind of in a unique position where their search for sustenance actually ends up creating life as opposed to sacrificing life. And so their pursuit for nectar and pollen actually creates as opposed to takes away. And that's a fairly unique thing actually here from what I can discern. And so that's pretty cool. And then of course, humans have been obsessed with honeybees for centuries. Honey, of course, is a really fast acting sugar that our brains love and our livers really dig. Beeswax is amazing. I have some samples back there. Pollen, royal jelly, and propolis. Technology advances, I think we're gonna maybe, hopefully, before it's too late, kind of get back with the program. As I said, humans have been obsessing over honeybees for quite a while. The depiction on the right is the Man of Bicor. It's a cave painting, and it's 8,000 some years old. And then, of course, the ancient Egyptians were some of the first migratory beekeepers. They would stuff bees literally on a boat and go down the Nile and actually migratory pollinate, basically migrate and pollinate a whole bunch of crops along the Nile. And of course, they have hieroglyphs too that depict bees and how they actually kept bees back in the day, about 10,000 years ago. And so just rounding out, just kind of discussing how much honeybees are able to give to us. So honeybees do collect nectar, which is really high in water, about 85% water, and then the rest is kind of sugars and enzymes. They reduce that nectar down to honey. They can actually also make beeswax out of nectar, which is a really cool process. Again, if I had more time. But then, of course, proper bee health is really, really important. Not all pollen is created equal. Goldenrod honey and goldenrod pollen have been shown to actually be really high in protein and actually really quite good for the bees to have right before they go into overwinter. It takes 12 honeybees their entire life, so about 4 weeks in the summertime, to make a teaspoon of honey. So that's a lot, but there are about 40,000 bees per colony, so you can actually end up getting a lot of honey. Propolis, I just have to say, if you guys don't know about propolis, it is amazing, and I definitely know my audience. So, well, I know you guys are naturalists, so quite often trees will actually they'll actually coat their really tender little buds, like their pre-leaves, in this really sticky resin. Not only is it unpalatable to a lot of animals, but it actually is also, this resin is actually also like antifungal, antibacterial. and antiviral actually as well. So it's the tree's way of actually protecting its freshly forming leaves that are about to come out. Honeybees have actually learned to collect this stuff from the sticky tree buds, and they'll pack it into their little pollen pants, and they'll actually bring it back to the hive, and they'll plaster it on the inside of their hive. And that's actually in order as a means of, for them to actually boost their immunity as well. And so that's why it's called propolis. So it's in defense of the city being the beehive. And so propolis is used in a lot of really cool ways. Again, I don't have enough time, but I could definitely go on all night. So honeybees actually have about a third of the immunity genes of your average insect, say like your fruit fly. A lot of that sacrifice, so being reduced down by a third immunity genes, came at a cost, and it was basically the cost of eusociality. And so with that, bees actually have to kind of make up for it by self-medicating and collecting this propolis. And so I have, this picture here is actually a picture that I took. It is a propolized mouse skeleton. So a mouse got into a bee colony somewhere, and it either got stung to death or it died. But as a means of reducing any bacteria or virus or any sort of fungal growth, the bees encased it in propolis because the bees were not able to drag it out of the hive. It was too heavy. So instead they mummified it, and they actually kind of just encased it so it didn't make the rest of them sick, which is really cool. Back there I actually have what I call a fried bumblebee. And it literally is fried. The bumblebee thought she would help herself to a little bit of the bee's honey. And what the honeybees actually do is that they kind of cluster the bumblebee, and they'll rip off all the hair, and they'll rip off legs and antenna, and then they'll increase their core temperature and literally fry, like cook the bumblebee to death. And that's a lot of the times how honeybees actually manage predators. And then, of course, us humans, we find uses, but again, the uses that we have applied to honeybee products are just outstanding. I'm sure you guys have heard of royal jelly. I've tried it like fresh out of the hive. It tastes like kind of rotten yogurt. I only had to try it a few times. But again, propolis is just so amazing. It's all kind of, it's unaltered either by the bees. They actually just collect it from the trees themselves. And it's shown actually that certain propolis from trees in Brazil are really, really medicinal and are actually really, really potent against fighting certain viruses like HIV. I make a tincture for people who actually have cold sores, and it tends to really keep the cold sores at bay. It doesn't get rid of the virus, but it actually works really, really well. So yeah, we sneak propolis into toothpaste now. And I think that's basically it. There are some resources here. These 4 books are amazing. I encourage, if you guys are on Instagram, if you follow the @Packer Lab on Instagram, Dr. Lawrence Packer out of York University, his posts are amazing. Like some of the pictures of bees that he posts like literally makes me tear up. There's this one kind of purple longhorn bee, and it looks like it's just like the galaxies on it. Like I can't stop staring at it most of the time. I know I might have a problem, but you know. And then there's a lot of gardening tips for the rusty patch bumblebee, and it actually addresses a lot of the other important pollinators, especially in more urban settings. And then I just wanted to thank everyone, honestly, for coming out. I wanted to thank John and Brian as well. I wanted to thank everyone on the Zoom. And I got cards. I have honey samples back there as well. But I do want to just make sure that we have some time for questions if it's not too late. There's a microphone up here. I'm not sure if anyone needs one. Sorry if I was speaking a little too quickly, too. Ooh. Any burning questions from anyone? If not, I mean, oh, yes. So sorry for people on Zoom. There's this shrub in this woman's backyard, and there's perhaps a specific pollinator that pertains directly to this fringed loosestrife. Is that what you said? Yeah. Have you seen any bees visiting it? Okay, fair enough. I'm searching my database. I've got nothing. But to be honest, I'm not sure if loosestrife was actually native to Ontario. Oh, that one is, okay. But the purple is not. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's the extent of my knowledge. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, okay. So the question is, if there's for people on Zoom, what to do basically when you see a swarm of bees. So what's the better kind of options? Yes, yeah. So either leaving the swarm to just do its thing, or to actually call the beekeeper to get it back. I think, to be honest, as a beekeeper, swarming is definitely something that you should manage for. It's rather irresponsible, in my opinion, to just kind of let your bees go all willy-nilly. Because again, like if it's, we're trying to keep people not scared of bees, so you don't really want swarms like under park benches or in people's trunks, stuff like that. So it would be, yes, but honeybees, again, are not native to North America. So we kind of want to keep their wild populations down. Unfortunately, they tend not to survive the winter anyway. So it is just kind of a waste of bees, to be honest, especially if you actually have like a mated queen that you purchased, and then you just kind of let her fly away. Sometimes too, if you let the bees swarm, the honeybees swarm too many times, they become really aggressive, and then they actually just kind of revert back into wild bees, and they just swarm and swarm and swarm. So it's a behavior that actually is oftentimes hard to reverse once it starts. Yes. Of course, yeah. And I mean, sometimes swarming tends to be really bad in spring, so around May. And then it's actually kind of bad right now, too. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Oh, two questions. We'll take the gentleman in the front.
It's kind of an evolutionary question. You mentioned earlier on that there was one of the mining bees that specialize in apples.
Yes.
I'm curious to know what they were adapted to before apples were introduced to North America.
Right.
Apples are European species.
Yes, yeah. So I believe, are there other members of the rose family that are native to North America?
Probably hawthorns.
Yeah. So I think as I guess like as cultivation perhaps started to happen, these bees actually became specialists, maybe just out of kind of need. Maybe their original habitat was taken over by apple orchards and they really had no other choice. I'm actually not entirely sure, but that's a really good point. Thank you. Yes.
Just in the last couple of weeks, I'm not sure what kind of bee it is. I will try to get a closer look because they're about 14, 15 feet up in the air. But they appear to be trying to nest in a metal shed. It's a hollow door. I'm like, why? There's all kinds of other options in the neighborhood. What is wrong with these bees?
Yes, right. I forgot to repeat the previous question. My apologies. And so the question from the audience was, these silly bees are building a nest really high up off the ground in a what would be like a hollow door, a metal shed door, and what are they doing and why? Any sort of cavity, if it honestly, it depends on the bee you're talking about. Is there a lot of activity coming out in and out? Okay. I would probably then wager that those are honeybees. Being that high up off the ground reduces kind of interactions with predators, so like skunks, raccoons, and all of that. So it's kind of nice and safe up there, more often than away from humans as well. But honeybees, when they're actually swarming, again, this very sophisticated system that they actually have, they send out scout bees, and these scout bees go out and they try to find an ideal cavity of about 40 liters. So whatever that hollow door is offering is probably pretty ideal for them to build a waterproof nest basically inside of, that's high and safe up off the ground. And so then the scout bees will go and kind of forage and like look around for these cavities, and then they'll actually come back and dance with great fervor to really kind of endorse, like, I found the best spot. And basically, like, the best dancer actually then takes more scout bees to go check it out. They all come back, and they actually all just make a decision unanimously to then head out to that spot. It's pretty cool. A spot like that would probably be pretty challenging. So the comment was that there may or may not be any beekeepers in the neighborhood. Quite often, again, a lot of swarms are actually just small enough. If we get an actual winter with snow, they may or may not survive. But last winter with the lack of snow was actually really hard on a lot of bees. So a lot of wild bees, again, don't necessarily make it through the winter, unfortunately. Wild honeybees. At the back there. So what native pollinators are most endangered by imported honeybees? That of urban environments, I would say. So a lot of the native pollinators are just eking out a living. You'll see like pollinator patches and stuff now in Toronto. I'm always so delighted. But these guys, honestly, like if they had more resources, they would actually be able to reproduce more. But when you slap in a rooftop bee operation, a rooftop honeybee hive, it really does put a lot of pressure on these urban pollinators. And so I'm just going to be, I mean, I really do enjoy it when people get into beekeeping, but urban beekeeping is actually really, really hard on a lot of the local native species, and I'm actually not that big of a fan of it, to be honest. Anyway, another question.
I think these large lawns that people seem to like is one of the worst things that we do.
The large lawns are one of the worst things, and I agree. It's a waste of time, money, fossil fuels. It just really doesn't make much sense. And then of course, if it's really dry, then you just water it. It's like, all right, so how's that water table treating you? It's kind of, it just doesn't really make sense to me. I'm sorry. Anyway, sometimes I actually stop and discipline people too. But I digress. Any other questions tonight? All right. Oh, okay. One more. Okay. Sorry, the question is, how do you treat a bee sting? So try to get the stinger out as fast as you can, because the less venom that gets pumped in, the better. Try to make sure the stinger comes all the way out. There's actually two parts to a stinger. And so if you scrape it out in the direction it was inserted, opposite to the direction it's inserted, you'll probably get most of it out. And then actually, if you can find some either narrow or broadleaf plantain, and you kind of grind it up, masticate it a little bit, get the juices going, you rub it on that sting, it tends to neutralize the venom pretty quickly. We're all good? All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a nice night. And yeah, there's samples of honey in the back, and if you want, there's some for sale up here too.
I would just like to say thank you from all of us.
Uh-oh, what did I do? Oh,
Some of the facts that you gave us were incredible and so diverse. Like, we think we know what we're talking about when we're talking about bees, and we really don't know that well at all.
no.
So all the stuff that you told us, like, I've learned so much from tonight alone. So we should have you come back another time and talk again.
I would love to.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. From
Thank
Owen Sound Field.